Okay. Are you with us, Jonny? Good morning.
Good morning, I am with you. Hi, everybody.
Oh.
Yes, indeed.
That's so nice to hear you. I'm so excited to hear your voice. I can't actually see you because I've got my phone the other way around. I know you're there.
That's a good job.
Have a look at you. No, you look good. You haven't got a
Thank
beard.
you. No, I got rid of that in the end. Yes, it was all going in the side of my mouth, and I thought, no, it's awful. Exactly, that's why it come off.
Right.
Never going to do it again.
Oh, like a bit sort of. I don't know. But I do like a bit of a beard, but
Bit of roughage.
bit of bit of rusty, Jonny. The Essex voice coming out of you there.
Yeah, I know, it comes out awful. Never mind.
And we love you for it. I tell you what, Jonny, actually, that bit of roughy tufty, it served you pretty well, hasn't it, throughout your career at various different times?
Yeah, I suppose so. It's been a battle, I think, as life can be sometimes. But overall, I've had a lot of fun, some nice results down the way, Le Mans, for example, and of course some Grand Prix wins at the same time. But a lot of good friends along the way, which I joined in the very early days of Formula 4. Still friends today, Mark Blundell, for example, and Damon Hill. So it's nice that we stick together. And of course, at the end of every single year since about 1992, I think it is, we all get together. Perry McCarthy normally organises it. Martin Brundle turns in. Jason Plato has actually joined us a couple of times. Doesn't always turn up. So, and then Steve Soper is there as well. Martin Donnelly is there. Derek Warwick turns up as well. And Mr. Palmer has been a new addition in the last couple of years. So it's great that we still all get together. Julian Bailey still turns up as well. So it's brilliant that we all get together.
It's like a super VIP four-wheel club, this. Where do you go dancing?
Normally we sort of start off at Langham's. And then who knows where it will end up.
Well, quite. I can't even imagine how those nights turn out.
No, you don't want to. You don't.
Before we pick apart various bits of your life,
no.
Are you well? And how has it been for you during lockdown? Obviously, you're going to get going again very soon, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. That'd be really nice. July sort of 3rd to 5th in Austria. So kickoff is coming our way in all different sports, which is brilliant as well. And for me, this sort of 3 months or so has been sort of quite constructive in many respects, because I have said this before, I didn't quite realise how much of a hoarder I have become. My garage, it's a bit of a triple garage. It was full of the most ridiculous stuff that I've kept and thought I might use that one day. Never have done. And I've cleared it out. And I have to say, it's a big old garage, a big old space. So that's been good. It's been nice because actually my granddaughter, and her fiance were over as well. So that was lovely, staying with us for the first probably 2.5 months, just a bit more. So it was great seeing her. She's only 7 months. So that's been lovely. Had the wife as well. No, she's not there. She was there earlier. Had the wife around as well, which was lovely. She hasn't left me yet, so I haven't got on her nerves too much. No, so actually it's been good. And of course with Sky F1, we've still been sort of doing our sort of vodcasts and everything else that we do as well. So we've still been active talking about F1.
So of your things that you were hoarding, what was the best thing or / worst thing that you threw out?
Well, I suppose one thing I do, I've always liked my tech. Computers was something when I was racing anyway in F1. I was used to try and build my own computer, and I had a couple of those stored out there, and I thought, oh, it'd be lovely to get them up and running again. And I tried to boot up one of those, and shock and horror, it didn't boot up at all. It was that blue screen of death that was there. But the speed that it was trying to boot itself to get to that blue screen was an absolute age. So I think that was the only one thing that I got rid of that I thought, oh, that'd be something I could enjoy. I did find a PlayStation as well the other day. So my original PlayStation as well.
Ah.
So I actually got that, and an Xbox. I got that up and running as well. So there's a couple of things that I've sort of found but did keep.
So were you doing any racing? Were you doing any e-racing then?
Well, I did the very first one in, well, the first two, one in Bahrain and then the second one in Australia. And they sent us a sim over, which I put in my lounge. And I thought, okay, this would be a bit of fun. Anthony Davidson, he got sent one at the same time. And then as things sort of was building up towards that first race in Bahrain, the speed difference between myself and Lando, for example, and all the other drivers involved and some of the gamers that were there as well was immense. And I could not work it out. I was talking with Anthony Davidson and he couldn't work it out as well. We were trying our hardest to go as fast as we possibly could. You have all these aids that you can switch on and switch off. And we're always told that the more you have on, the slower that you go. So the more you switch off, the faster you will go. But when you try to turn off the traction control, which was a nice aid to use, we literally couldn't stay on the track. I mean, literally couldn't stay on the track. You'd do about 20 meters and you'd end up straight into the wall. So we couldn't quite work it out. Then we started seeing pictures of some of the drivers' simulator machines that they've got.
Yeah.
Mine was just a seat with a screen, with a computer on the floor, very basic steering wheel, basic pedals. And then they've got these 3-screen, proper seated, almost like a monocoque type of simulator that they're driving. And they are a world away to what myself and Anthony were using. So when we went to that first race in Bahrain, I can't remember, I qualified right near the back somewhere. I think I was second to last, if I remember correctly. But I did lead the first couple of laps.
Of course you did.
A slight cheat. Going towards turn one, which some of you may have seen, because everyone was talking about there's going to be carnage, going to be absolute carnage going into turn one. So I thought, okay, it started the carnage. So I thought, oh, what's the best way out of this to be safe and safe to everybody else on the racetrack as well, my fellow drivers? Well, I'll do a shortcut right and it will cut out turn one and I'll be able to join at turn two. And yeah, so I led from turn two onwards for about a lap and a bit. And then I ended up 12th and 13th, I think it was at the end, where again, it was very, very difficult. Did Australia as well, really struggled at the same place there. And then I know I sort of wasn't asked back, surprisingly. And then Anthony Davis actually got a real sim sent to him, and it made the world of difference to him. Yeah. So it was a bit frustrating, actually, that we didn't all have the same simulator, because I think that would have been really good, because then everybody would have been in the same boat. But that wasn't the case.
You got to be sort of level pegging, haven't you, and something like that. Mind you, have you? I mean, it's kind of not in Formula One, I suppose. There is
it doesn't
that
work
as well.
that way.
You know, it's massive, though, isn't it? It's such massive business. It's the it's Le Mans 24 race at home this weekend, isn't it? Coming up, and I only know that because Wolves have got involved. They've joined with Gulf Racing, and they're you know, lots of football teams, lots of different sporting and corporations are getting involved in e-racing, and it's massive money. And it only, to be honest, I mean, obviously I've seen it through the gadget show and everything growing over the years and stuff, but it only came to my attention how serious companies take it recently with that whole debacle in Formula E. With the Audi driver getting fired from his actual ride for what happened. What did you make of that?
Well, I thought it was very interesting. The thought had come across my mind, actually, to get someone else to do it for me. So it was interesting that he did do exactly that, but he didn't benefit one iota. So I thought it was very interesting, the outcome of what they did to him. So yeah, it's not the way it should be. It's a typical racing driver trying to show show himself in a better light. But I think at the end of the day, like you said, it's a massive business, the gaming world. It's great that we've seen people like Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen, who we haven't seen him so much in the F1 game itself, but he's involved, I know, normally with Lando Norris and all the other drivers. George Russell is very new to it, but actually is doing fantastically well. So it's good to see new drivers coming into it, but actually adapting to it in an amazing way, which I think is really good. And I saw, I think, Valtteri Bottas actually joined in Monaco, I think it was. I think it was Monaco he was in as well. So it's good to see all the other drivers, you know, the modern ones, veterans like me, you know, getting involved with that, with the gaming world in this weird world we find ourselves in.
Well, you know, I suppose it's racing, and it's probably brought a lot of people into that side of racing. It's another string to the bow for drivers to earn a bit more cash, because, of course, they're all strapped, aren't they, Formula One drivers?
Oh, of course they are, yes. Tough.
Hey, talking of cash, could Formula One have survived, Jonny, if there'd been no racing this year, do you think?
Well, again, it wouldn't have helped the smaller teams. I think they're the ones who are really struggling. Williams, as we know, seems to be up for sale at the present time. McLaren have been struggling as well. I know when there was all this talk of the budget cap, I know Zach Brown was very much trying to get it down to that around 100 million mark. So it just shows that those two teams, yes, are sort of struggling. And of course, the income comes from the cars being on track, so they can continue and develop themselves as races and years go by. So it would have been very, very tough, and maybe impossible for some of those teams to have survived, just because of that income is such an important part of them and their continuation in the F1 World Championship. So yes, it is important, and I'm glad that everything has come together. And I think what was lovely as well, it seemed to be all the teams come together, actually, and we're trying to, you know, work out in the best way that it would work for the guys at the front, but also for the guys at the back.
For once.
Yes. Let's see how long it lasts.
And how does it work for you guys? How will it work for television?
Well, I think that's still being sorted out, because obviously when we go to Austria, now I don't know who's going yet, and we haven't been told exactly who will be there. But once we go to Austria, we go from the airport, which will be an F1 plane, which we will only be together more or less the whole way through. We go straight to the circuit. We get tested. We then directly go back to the hotel. We wait for, I think it's about 6 to 8 hours, something like that, for that test result. And then obviously, if we're okay, we will go in the next morning, and I believe we get retested once again, just to double check. For those people who don't get through that test, they actually are then, I think at the moment, I understand, sent home. I'm not quite sure how that works out. And then I think during that that weekend, we're basically in this little eco F1 world where everybody sort of still has the distancing, like we all know today. And I think then testing will happen, I think every couple of days as well, just to make sure that everybody's okay. But I think once we're in that sort of bio system, of course, the first race will happen. We all have to then stay out in Austria for the next weekend for the second race. And it'll be the same process, basically. We can stay, we go to our hotel, we're all staying sort of together, the Sky Hotel, let's say. But you're not allowed out. You can't go to the boozer or
can't go for a Venus Schnitzel.
You can't go for anything. Absolutely nothing. It's all got to happen within the hotel itself. So it's going to be very, very strict, very tough. And sometimes I think people that have families are going to find it probably the toughest, because obviously they're going to be away for a long space of time. So it's going to be very, very tough for everybody, and that includes the mechanics and everybody else, of course, because those families aren't going to see them as often as they would have done in a normal F1 season. But we will be racing. I think that's the important thing as well. It's great to see the drivers, isn't it? Great to see them back on track again.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And I think of all the sports, actually, motor racing, I know it's annoying if you want to go watch the racing, but in terms of watching it on the television, it's not going to make a massive amount of difference, is it? No. Not having a crowd there, really, because what you normally see is pretty much what's happening on track.
Yeah, and again, the focus for the drivers, for the engineers, for the teams is always going to be what's happening with the car. So most of the time, as you know, Suzi, when you're in the paddock, you don't really see the drivers that often. They're normally either in the car with a helmet on, or they're in with an engineer having a chat and a debrief. So they spend so many hours either in a car or with an engineer. So you don't really see them that much. And the only time probably the race fans at the circuit see the drivers is obviously when they on the back of the truck, you know, touring around the circuit on a Sunday. That's really the only time. They might see them coming in the morning, those eager beavers who like sort of seeing their F1 drivers at sort of 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. But for the drivers, for the teams, nothing changes. It's all about sort of going as fast as they possibly can. So you're right. What we see on track will be exactly the same as what we've seen before.
And just saying that there made me think, you know, how different was it back in, I hate this phrase, but back in your day?
Isn't that long ago?
No, it's not. It's not that long ago. It is quite long ago, though.
It is quite a long time ago.
How different is it? Let's start with that. Let's start with appearing to the public and visibility and that kind of thing. How much has that changed, do you feel?
Well, I think the core race fans have always been there. They've always been the tests that we used to do sort of in the, let's say, the early 90s, for example. There was always a core race fan that always turned up, loved the technology, always wanted to try and get as close to the car as they possibly could, which back then they could. They could go to Silverstone, for example, and they could walk more or less into the back of the garage. And of course, that's not the way anymore, especially at a race weekend as well. You could get pretty close at the old Silverstone where the MotoGP pits are, and used to get very close to that fence. But of course, it's further away now, so it's much more difficult for them to see the cars close up. So the race fan probably hasn't really changed. You know, everybody's got their favourite. They will always be there for their favourite and always be cheering them on. That was always the same. The biggest thing is probably, the biggest change, I think anyway, is within the bubble itself. And probably the first thing I remember, and I had no clue what it was all about, was the media. Because I had no media training. I probably spoke to a couple of journalists for Autosport magazine, for example, or something like that. But as far as the world press, I didn't meet them until I went to my first race in Brazil, in Rio. That was the first time that I was aware of what the world media was all about. But there were less of them back then. There was probably the BBC, Globo, I remember. I think there was the Italian TV at the same time. So there were way fewer TV companies that were sort of showing Formula One back then. And then you probably had your normal British press who were there for the newspapers, the Express or the Mail or the Times or whatever it may be. And there was the same group, Ray Matz, for example, who was always part of that. And he and the rest of the group were basically at every single race. So then you started to learn all about that. But of course, nowadays, there's a sea, an absolute sea of people from not just the written press, as we know it in a newspaper or a magazine, but it's also the online bloggers, for example, stuff like that. So there's a hell of a lot more people want more time from you. So I think the managing of the drivers now has become such that sometimes it's a bit frustrated, because when I was racing, the journalists would come to me and say, you know, have you got five minutes? And I'd sort of go, yeah, or come back in about an hour and we can have a sit down. When now you have to go through a whole series and raft of people before it comes back the answer, which is normally no, because there are so many people wanting them. So the drivers in some ways are under more pressure, but in other ways they're not, because obviously it doesn't go directly to them anymore, so that pressure is taken away. But I think overall the only other difference is probably the engineering side of things has changed massively. It's, you know, these cars are such a complicated piece of technology, but the way that the engineers, you know, I remember I had one engineer, race engineer. I probably then had three or four mechanics. That was it. One mechanic did one corner. So left front, left rear, right rear. Had a gearbox guy. So there's 5. And that was probably about it. And that guy that did that left front, for example, did the tyres, did the brakes, did the suspension, did the springs on the dampers and everything else. So his job was that one corner, where now you've got one person for every nut and bolt. One nut and one bolt on that left corner. So it's very, very different from that point of view. And the engineers and the engineering and the data that they have nowadays is huge. They know exactly what's going on, as you know, live when it's actually on the racetrack. In the old days, there used to be sort of that driver excuse that you could come up with and you could get away with. That's gone because they know what's gone on and they can analyze it so quickly. So they're very aware of what's happening on track. I think it's fantastic what they do. Sometimes I'd like to have less engineers input. Sometimes it frustrates me when you get the engineer telling the driver would strap this and strap that, and your tire's getting a bit hot on the left front, so back off a little bit, or your brakes are a bit hot. The skill actually is the driver to feel it, to adapt to it, not someone telling him what's going on. I think that was always part of a skill that I know Senna and Mansell, just for example, had. And I think that's something like Lewis. I think Lewis still has an element of that still there. He still wants to do it himself. Kimi always, leave me alone, I know what I'm doing. That's lovely because he wants to do it himself. He wants to push himself to those absolute limits. So that's one thing. So probably, there's a lot of changes, but the core of F1 is still the same.
And I suppose for the drivers, the desire to cross that line, to see the checkered flag first, is exactly the same as it was for you, is exactly the same as it was for anybody going back to the beginning of Formula One.
Yeah, definitely so. Again, the challenge is always there to drive the car as fast as you possibly can. Yeah, you've got a lot more help to be able to do that, but at the end of the day, you've still got to get that car on that limit, and that's the skill that is still there today, which is great.
And obviously, it's a lot safer. It's still motorsport, and it's still dangerous, but it's a lot safer than it was back in the 90s, back in the 70s. I mean, Obviously goes without saying. But as a young driver now, or even Lewis, can't believe I'm not calling him young anymore, but he's one of the older ones in the paddock now.
Yeah.
I suppose it's impossible for them to really understand what it was like, and it's easy for them to kind of take for granted the situation that they're in terms of safety, because it's been laid down by guys like you, and prior to that, obviously Jackie Stewart had a huge influence.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Susie. That safety is very important. When you do that sort of late 60s era where there was basically a driver being lost every single Grand Prix that they went to. We don't want that, of course. So the safety has moved on massively, just from the cockpit of a driver to the way you can extract the guy out of the seat if there is an incident. I remember when I started, the monocoque used to end there. So the shoulder and the rest of it were hanging out the top of it. And of course, now it's so enclosed. You've got that lovely sort of head protection in the monocoque itself. They've got the hands device if they're in a big sort of incident. So that stops the head moving around. So there's a lot of different things that have aided the drivers as far as the safety goes. From the tracks, same thing. Most of them have changed. Probably Suzuka is probably the rawest of old school tracks that we still probably go to. Yeah, probably
one of the greatest, of course, as well.
Yes, indeed, and that's loved by F1 and motorbike guys alike. So that's really cool, which is interesting that still gets commented upon. Where Suzuka is real. It's sort of makes you feel alive, and so I think that's really good, because I think one thing that probably frustrates me in one way is with all this runoff area that we have nowadays, the only thing is, and I know Lewis has actually mentioned this to me before, is the only problem with that runoff area is if you are going to make, or you do make a mistake as a driver, in the old days, there was probably a bit of a curb, about 1.5 meters of grass, then the gravel, and then obviously the barrier. Now, you knew that if you made a mistake, there was going to be a big penalty for that mistake. So you always then had to sort of try and feel your way to that limit. When now, if you overdrive it in a qualifying way, it doesn't matter anymore, because you just go, oh, well, I'll just go off then, and then I'll come back on again. There's no penalty for that. And that frustrates me. And I know Lewis, I think it was a good few years ago in a GPDA meeting, I think it said, guys, I think we're using the track limits a bit too much. Maybe we should think about penalties, for example. And there were zero support for that. But that goes back to the mentality of some of the new drivers coming in, and it's not their fault. They come in, like you said, Suzi, they come into a world that is super safe, and that's what they know. So they think, well, it should be there. It should be there for that safety and, you know, not getting injured and God forgive someone sort of losing their life. So I understand it, but I think the raw skill is still there, but there's always a bit of a get out card. And I think it's lovely having someone like Max coming in, who is very raw, wants that challenge, a bit like Lewis, a bit like Sebastian at the same time, Charles Leclerc as well, that's just to name a few, who still want that challenge of driving between the white lines. And the white lines have always been the track limits. And that's what I love about it. You see a couple of people always go over the white line, and then we've had all these four wheels off the circuit and everything else, and then it will be engineers saying, well, we lost time on the exit of turn 4, so there's no gain. And I always used to go, you only use it if there's a gain. Wherever that gain may be, there is always going to be a gain from it. And that may not necessarily be sometimes at that particular point. But if you have a wider track, that means you don't lean on the tyre. If you don't lean on the tyre doesn't go off. And the tyre doesn't go off, that means you go faster. Well, so there's always a way. There's always something you can argue. But I love the drivers that still drive between the white lines.
Yeah, you described it really well there, because your driving behaviour is affected by the penalty of the white lines, isn't it? So yeah. It's not necessarily what the engineers are talking about. It can happen prior to that, because you wouldn't have driven like that if you couldn't have gone over the lines. It's that's the thing about Formula One, isn't it? There's always so many talking points on and off the track. Whether it's just over the limits or, you know, in the paddock, it's full of controversy, and
you need that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. How much has it changed since Mr. E left?
Well, it's easier to it always used to be something you had to book about a year in advance to get some tickets, like for a Silverstone, for example. I say that actually in the early 90s, it wasn't too bad. They always used to give you about 2 or 3, 4 or 5 extra, sort of varied sometimes. Then it got to a point that you always had to sort of write a fax to Mr. E, and then he would sort of then distribute those passes if he felt that was the case. Then as I then left F1, it became more difficult to get a pass to go to a race. And sometimes I thought, well, I can't even be asked to ask, because I know it's not necessarily going to come to you. And I sort of thought, well, that's not sort of really, that's the way that it should be. It shouldn't be free for everybody, but there should be certain ones, drivers, I think, especially, that should have that ability to get a pass. And I'm not saying it didn't happen, it did happen. But it's a lot more simplistic nowadays to be able to get that pass on a Saturday night, maybe if my daughters decide, I want to come to Silverstone. And normally that is there. The other thing that is good as well is there was a point that the early 90s paddock was pretty busy, really sort of a great place to be, great atmosphere. Then it became sort of less busy, which then lost the atmosphere. Yeah. And the atmosphere has come back again. Yeah. Now you look at the grid. The grid used to be sort of humming with people. Then in the sort of the late 90s and early thousands, it was empty. And they were just the drivers, just the engineers and some TV people, and Martin Brundle running around the grid. Now it's humming again. It's absolutely jammed, and I mean, it is madness on that grid. Is it good to see? I think it's brilliant. So all that type of stuff is really, really good. And I think where Liberty Media, Ross, Pat Simmons, for example, bringing in, trying these new ideas for the rules for the future, is a good thing. And I think that it's more healthy, I think, from a fan's point of view. There are these times now that actually they open up the pit lane so they can actually walk down the pit lane. That never would have happened before. So I think that's a good thing as well.
And the rule changes, obviously, you know, I think a lot of Formula One fans wanted them to happen quickly, and clearly, you know, this situation has kind of delayed that as well. But long term, in 10 years' time, is Formula One going to be healthy?
Well, again, the possibilities are there for that to happen. Now, the teams have obviously got to work together to make that happen as well, but they've got to work together with the FIA and Liberty as well, and Ross, and as I said, Pat and everybody else, Chase Carey. So, but it's everybody doing that. I think there was always sometimes a bit of a divide from the teams to the FIA and maybe the rights holder at the same time. So Liberty as a rights holder need to be very close to the FIA, because the FIA are the ones who write the rules. And if they write the rules in the right way, that allows the teams and all the teams to be more competitive. But of course, that's always one issue you're always going to have, is where the big teams always want to keep their advantage over everybody else. But for the show, that's where you want to get it closer and closer. Now, it should be better when we come to 2022. We're going to have to see exactly where we're going to be. There's always that chance that because it's the new formula coming in, that the big teams are always able to be ahead of those smaller teams, midfield teams. But I hope it's a chance for F1 to make it more racy, more racy, I suppose.
Yeah, closer.
Because I think that's what we want. I think we want, the racing point or the Force India of the past to have that chance of getting on the podium, where at the moment that chance is not really there for them. So, and that's down to reliability for one. But I think if there is that closeness there, the ability for F1, like you said, 10 years down the line, will be healthy, because the competition is going to be very strong from other sports that people love. So, and that competitiveness means, well, we've got to make our sport competitive to be able to compete against them. So there's a lot of positivity, I think, out there. We have some good people involved within different teams, like Zach. I like Zach a lot. I think Zach's very, very good for the sport. His ideas are smart as well. But of course, it's that coming together and getting everybody on the same page. Yeah,
I'm sorry if you can hear. It sounds like a two-stroke paddock behind me.
He does.
It's Strimmer Central here today for some reason. You're a MotoGP fan, aren't you, Jonny?
Yeah, love it. Yes, love the characters, love the racing. Yeah.
And you ride bikes, or have ridden bikes?
I do.
You have ridden bikes, haven't you?
Oh, I have ridden bikes. Yeah, not very well. I'm pretty pathetic on it. Well, actually, now you say that. Last night, I had a bit of an issue with a fuel pump on the bike that I haven't ridden for a long, long time. So I thought, right, well, I'll take it upon myself to fix it. So I took the tank off, turned it upside down, trying to work out how you get the pump out. It's a very complicated thing. So I got eventually the pump out. There was a lot of rotten pipes in there. So it was a bit of a mess. So I got the pump, I got the filter, I got some new pipes, put it all together last night and started her up. I can't actually show you, it's a shame. I've got an old Ducati 916.
Oh, have you now?
Yeah.
Very nice.
So I've just got her running last night, actually. So I ran her up for the first time in a good few years. So that would be nice to get her back on the road. I've got a Harley Davidson that I like to ride as well, but I've got to get that sorted as well. So when I was living in Monaco, it's registered there, but I haven't done the import stuff yet. I don't know how you do it. If someone out there can help me, please do. I don't know how you get this thing registered in the UK. So bikes, I'm not good at it. I normally fall off the Ducati because my legs are a little bit short. It's just a little bit too tall for me, and the way my ankles move, which is not very much, I do find it quite, I'm a bit clumsy getting on it and off it. But the Harley's much easier because it's lower to the ground, so I can get both feet on the ground. So Ducati, hopefully it'll be on the road soon.
Can we talk about your feet?
You can. Go on then. My monkey's feet.
I just, your feet, because sometimes I would catch you up in the paddock and we'd be walking somewhere and you'd be like, just slow down a bit, girl, I've got the old feet, don't move that quickly and all that. I look back at the start of your career, up until the accident at Brands, and
I was good then.
Do you know what? The destiny, that it just looked like we're going to have a British world champion here multiple times. I mean, and you had all these things on the table, all these offers on the table. It was kind of, was just meteoric rise, wasn't it? And the obvious talent and speed that you had and stuff. And Eddie Jordan was obviously incredibly instrumental in your career at that point, wasn't he?
No. I was instrumental in Eddie Jordan's success. Wrong way round.
True.
Yes. If we hadn't won that British F3 Championship, if I hadn't won that British F3 Championship, it would have been nothing.
So for anybody that's watching this that doesn't know, because there are a lot of people, Jonny, that, you know, join this for a bit of company, that have locked down on their own and have been for the last few months. We'll just step through it. That was bad terminology. From obviously you won the British Formula 3, went to 2000, Brands Hatch, and it actually wasn't a massive crash, was it? It was sort of a glance into the back of you.
It wasn't what? Say that again. It wasn't a massive crash.
No, it was a massive crash.
I lost the front of the car. The front of the car came off.
The crash was massive, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it didn't look like a massive shunt. It looked like more of a kind of, not a tap, obviously, but, you know.
A glance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if I'm in the cockpit, yes, at that particular time, as we're going down that straight, I think I've just selected fourth, so we're doing about 160, I think it is at that point. And then Gregor Wojtek, a Swiss driver who had a bit of a reputation. He'd actually taken me off in Vallelunga in the second race.
Yeah, a bit clumsy, wasn't
season. Yeah, very clumsy. So he was trying. I always knew I didn't get a particularly good run out of Surtees onto the Grand Prix circuit. So I always knew if you hover in the middle of the track, it's very, very difficult for anybody to pass you. But then Gregor being Gregor, tried to sort of pass me, and I think part of his wheels were on the grass, just on the grass. But he hadn't judged it perfectly, and he just tapped the rear, my left rear. And all I can remember, even still today, all I can remember is the car turning very sharp left, very, very quickly. And then, unfortunately, the way the barrier is at Brands Hatch, as you go down the hill towards, and then up the hill towards Hawthorne, is the bridge that goes across, which goes across to Druids on the other side. Now, the barrier in a normal racetrack just goes straight. And it goes down, and it comes up, and it goes around Hawthorne. Well, the barrier went obviously normal, and then where the base of the bridge was, the barrier actually turns right, then it sort of goes under the bridge, then it comes back and rejoins the normal barrier. So I remember the car flicking left, and all I can remember thinking was, and that's all I got, it was literally, they couldn't even get the word shiter out, because I knew I was going to hit this barrier at a pretty rapid rate. And I can remember the first impact, and it was quite a big impact, so you were wrong too. It was a glance, not a glance at all. My head going forward, the car spinning around, and unfortunately, when I look at the video now, as you see the front of the car's already off and my legs are hanging out the front. Then it goes head on again on the other side, which is where I think all the damage was done. And then when I stopped, I remember opening my eyes, looking forward, and all I could see was a big hole in the front, and all I could see was the top of my knees. So the first thing that came into my head was, from my knee down, they've gone. And that was really how I sort of then tried to sort of put my head back. And I remember the marshals coming up. And I was just saying, knock me out, knock me out, knock me out, knock me out. Because I just didn't want to know, because I thought the worst had sort of happened at that point. So I was unlucky, because obviously I was able to have a career in F1. And I was unlucky because, well, it wasn't unlucky because I was very confident, massively confident. Like you said, Suzi, I had all these people. Enzo Ferrari wanted to meet me, which happened the week before when I tested Lotus at Monza. Frank Williams was there on the Sunday. He wanted to have a chat with me after the race. Peter War from Lotus, they were interested. I already had interest from Benetton anyway with Peter Collins. I had an option with a contract with them anyway. Ken Tyrrell was another one who was interested as well. So I had the majority of the F1 group wanted to be part of me. So there was a crash earlier on, which was stopped, which was Roberto Moreno crash going into paddock because he was taken off by Gregor Wojtek, unbelievably so. So they stopped the race. We then reformed on the grid itself, and again, very relaxed, very confident, because the first part of the race I was sort of, I don't know, 20 seconds, I think it was, sort of ahead of Martin Donnelly, strangely enough. It was his first race in Formula 3000. And very confident, sitting on the pit wall, laughing and joking, you know, no worries whatsoever. And then as I parked on the grid for the restart, as you know, Suzi, it's a bit of a dip on pole position. So I thought, well, I'll try and be a little bit smart. Why I changed my mindset, I really don't know. So there is a dip, a bit like that. So I thought, well, if I park the car like this, when I get away, it will sort of go down the dip, but it will be straight. But of course, once I did the start, got a lot of bit of wheel spin. So instead of it sort of going straight like I thought, it actually went further down. I got more wheel spin, and then I lost position to Martin Donnelly and Pierre Luigi Martini, I think it was. So I was third going into paddock, but still wasn't really concerned because I had this 20-second advantage because it was going to be a two-part race. So it wasn't really going to be a big issue for me. So very relaxed. But of course, then that crash sort of happened. But that was destiny, I suppose. You know, I wish I hadn't parked it like I did on the grid. I didn't get a bad start. Wasn't the best start. Wasn't a bad start. I was still in a good position anyway. But it was just sort of to be, unfortunately. Wish it hadn't happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously it was a pivotal moment in your career. Yeah. But you know, when you said that you looked down and you could only see your knees and you put your head back and you just wanted to be knocked out, what did you feel? Did you feel anything at the time? Did you feel any pain?
No, absolutely nothing. No, everything felt sort of pretty normal from that point of view. The only way I can explain probably one feeling I got, I don't know who has been punched in the face or pushed in the face, and you have that sort of funny, sort of buzzy little feeling in the head. I don't know if anyone's felt that. That was the only sort of thing I felt. As far as the pain in my legs or my ankles, absolutely nothing. No. And I know the body sort of produces a sort of a very strong pain what do you call it? Pain distributions into the body to sort of take away that pain. A bit like morphine. I think it's 20 times stronger than morphine. So that didn't really, it wasn't really there. And that's maybe because I didn't really know what had happened to my ankles at the time. But no, strangely nothing for the next week. I remember, I think there was nothing there. I was on morphine in the hospital. I do remember watching, because Birmingham was then the following weekend, and I remember in my hospital bed watching that, although because the morphine was sort of quite strong, all I can remember is my eyes open, no problem, everything was all okay. And when I closed my eyes, I went into this weird sort of land where it was me and my wife under a waterfall, naked, water's dripping all over us, and then suddenly our skins peeled off like a banana. And then we turned into these sort of monsters that we then started eating each other. And then more monsters came along and were just sort of eating each other. I'd open my eyes and it would stop. I'd close my eyes and I'd go back to exactly the same part that I was there before. And then weirdly enough, Suzi, they took me off the morphine. From that part. That's the only thing I can remember in hospital. And then I remember the throbbing of the blood obviously going through my feet, and that was quite a horrible feeling because you can't do anything with it. It's just throb and throb and throb, and they were very swollen at that time. So, but I do remember that morphine thing. It was really, really weird.
That is weird.
Very weird.
Yeah, morphine does. But I remember having some very strange thoughts when I had morphine. But anyway, we're not talking about that. But you, I mean, essentially, to not beat about the bush here, you were lucky that your foot wasn't amputated, weren't you? I mean, I had this conversation with Martin Brundle as well about his accident.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of the rehabilitation, then, because the thing about this story is obviously that happened, and the impact of the crash was massive, as you say, and in the cars today, you probably would have been able to get up and walk away from that crash, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So I didn't answer you because you froze. So I think I missed a little bit there. But yeah, you're right. And I think the only crash I can probably really think of is where these cars have come on so much. I don't know if you remember that crash with Robert Kubica in Canada when he was with the BMW. That was absolutely unbelievable how he walked away from that car. I know I think he broke a little bone in his leg, I think it was. But overall, he should have lost his legs and probably his life if you go back to that sort of 80s era. But that's just where the carbon fiber technology has moved on so much. Because when I was doing Formula 3000, it was very early on with customer, let's say, carbon fiber chassis. Reynard were doing the chassis. I'd won the championship in Formula 3. It was their first season in Formula 3000 as it was. And to make a car quick, it's got to be stiff. But of course, the technology in those days was quite expensive to really implement the proper way of wrapping a car. And this is not a criticism of what Reynard did at the time. It was just, that was that era. And you had to make it very stiff, as I said. So it was high modulus. And high modulus is normally you put a lot of glue into the wrap of the carbon fiber to make it stiff. But the unfortunate thing is when you hit something, it's like glass, like fiberglass, so it just shatters, which is exactly what happened. So I know they changed the bulkheads. I remember one thing later for the new design of the Formula 3000 car. So it was just unfortunately that era. But then if I probably go, okay, well, if I did it 5 years earlier, I probably would have died because the cars were not capable of being able to absorb that type of energy. If I'd done it 5 years later, I probably would have stood up, brushed off the grass and walked away without a problem at all. It was just that era that we were in. But it's brilliant, and we sort of, spoke about it a bit earlier on, where, the safety has, moved on massively. And it's something that's fantastic to see. That crash, as I said, with Robert Kubica was just unbelievable. But that's where the strength has come on. Do I wish I'd been in an era where it was super safe and everything would have been okay? Well, weirdly, no, because I think it was just that time that was very exciting, to be perfectly honest. I think it was really good. And, we can only talk about Martin Donnelly, who was my teammate, as I said, that weekend at Brands Hatch, who then raced for Lotus in 1990 and had that unbelievable crash that he had in Jerez, where effectively he was dead when they sort of got to him because he'd swallowed his tongue, and Professor Sid Watkins got his tongue out and got him back to life. But how he survived that is just, who knows? I really, really find it unbelievable that Martin's still with us today. But that again just shows how luck sometimes comes your way. He just got spat out the side of it. There was nothing left to the car, but he was spat out the side down the middle of the track. That saved him. He was still strapped in the seat when he stopped. So you need that little bit of luck. And as I said, with my crash at Brands, it was lucky, unlucky, because if I had lost my legs, I never would have had a career. But I did have them. Yeah, I had the damage to my ankles, which made racing and driving very different to what I had before. You sort of alluded to how my career was sort of strong and everybody wanted a part of me. The only thing I can say that changed, and it's a difficult one because the only other guy that I know does that now is Lewis Hamilton. If you go into Copse Corner, just for example, at Silverstone, I remember asking him, what do you look at? And he goes, I don't look at anything. And what it is with the top, I think the top elite drivers, probably MotoGP at the same time, motorbikes, is that they have this sort of 180-degree view of everything that happens in front. So the speed of the corner coming up and the braking point and that turn-in point is just done by these eyes. And these eyes can take all that information and then they just do it in a pure natural way. And when you get taught at a racetrack, there's always a cone for the entry, there's a cone for the apex, there's a cone for the exit, and that's what you aim at. But when you're at the very, very top of driving, you don't look at any of that stuff. But after the crash, I could not judge it in the same way. All that feeling had gone because I think the way that the feet were reacting didn't correspond to what was happening up here. I think that was the same, but the feeling or the filter from my feet to my brain had gone, and that never ever came back. So I had to look at things to be able to brake, and that is not the pure natural way. And I think that was the only thing that frustrates me. That out of, I did 161 Grand Prix, there was one Grand Prix that came back, one, and I don't know why, and that was Malaysia 99. No clue why it came back.
That's an incredible explanation. I think you described that really well. It made me feel like when you're at the top of your game, bikes, cars, motorsport generally, that 180 vision, it's almost as though you're beyond what you can see. You've already, because obviously you know the track really well, but with the field, you don't need to see that because you're already there and you're positioning everything to be ahead of yourself. But if you're like if you're tired and you get in the car, and sometimes this happens to me, I have to think about what I'm doing, whereas other times I get in and I don't know how I've gone from A to B.
Yeah.
It's that feel on a times a million, isn't it, in motorsport? That was for you the hardest part then afterwards, apart from obviously the general loss of that kind of connected feeling, was braking, presumably?
Yes, and it's not the braking as in, although I could never really get the pressure that was really needed, especially in a qualifying situation. Race wise, that was okay, and that's something you never ever lose. The racecraft never leaves you, so that was probably very fortunate because I was still able to do the racing itself. That feeling of what the tyre was doing, reacting to what the tyre was doing, because in those days the radio, if the radio worked at most of the tracks, it never did. It worked probably going down the pit straight, but at the back of the track, it was just a crackle. Nowadays, they're just absolutely perfect the whole lap round. But qualifying was always my problem. So the braking is not purely about stamping on it as hard as you can and then turning into the corner. It's how you apply the braking, and then it's how you then ease off the braking to get that whole smooth feeling without jerking the car around and making it unstable. As Jackie Stewart would always say, you got to drive it smooth, you got to treat it like a lady. And it was very true. Very true. That's the one thing I got, because because I could only do right foot braking. I could never do left foot braking because my ankle hardly moves on the left side. So I haven't got that feeling of the tips of your toes, there's little pads that we have that you can feel it, and then it all goes through to the ball of your foot, then it goes through your ankle, then it goes through your leg. And as I said, all that feeling disappeared. And when you haven't got that feeling anymore, it then becomes, instead of the tips of your toes taking all that little special feeling, it's then got to be my ankle, then it has to be my knee, then it has to be my hip. So I had to brake almost with my hip and my knee if I did left foot braking. So that never ever worked. And if I got into a race car now, I'd struggle quite a bit. So it was right foot braking, but because my big toe on my right foot got dislocated and sort of cut off at the top of the big toe, there was a lot of callus that sort of grew around the front of it, let's say, onto the pedal. So that to the pedal. So it got very, very sensitive at the same time. But my toes are sort of like this. They're not flat like that anymore. So they don't move very much. So all this sensitivity has sort of disappeared. But then you find a way around it. And that's what I had to do. I had to find a way around it. That's not the natural way. That's not what I did before, because I never even thought about what my feet were doing and where they needed to be and how I was lifting off and how I was applying the throttle or the brake or whatever it may be. So all those things I had to readjust, and that was very difficult, but it still enabled me to sort of be competitive, I suppose, to a degree. I wasn't the elite sportsman Jonny Herbert that I was before, but I was still very good. But very good doesn't win you a world championship. That's the difference. You can be very, very, very good, but if you're not that elite is always going to have that advantage.
it's about small percentages, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it just really goes to show how much you wanted to do that. You wanted to race cars, because to come out of that crash at Formula 3000 and then make your debut in Formula 1 in Rio, just a small amount of time later, I can't get over how extraordinary that is. I mean, the rehab, because, you know, they told you would never race again. And of course, you, being you, just went...
Never walk.
Yeah.
I never walk. Yeah.
Now
So,
come on, where did that come from then? How can, when you say you know, you drive around these problems, you do, where does that tenacity come from in Jonny Herbert?
Well, from that point, I was still lucky. Peter Collins was still wanting me to be in the car, weirdly, for 1989. And this is when I was still in hospital. My left foot wasn't moving at all in the very early days. And I think when it moved a millimetre, I think only moves about sort of 15 millimetres now. I remember getting Peter Collins phoning up and sort of saying, "How you doing?" I said, "No, I said, it's moving. My foot's moving." It was only a millimetre and it was moving. But the biggest thing for me to get back in, I remember I hadn't been an F1 driver. I was still on this sort of journey. There was still a tunnel with a very small light, but there was still a light. And trying to achieve this dream that I'd been living for, well, what was I, 24 years old, 23, 24 years old. I hadn't achieved it. I never made it. I'd driven one and I'd gone very well. And a lot of people wanted to talk about me, but I hadn't been in a Grand Prix. So that drove me to do everything that I possibly could. And I had two ways of going into this. One was going, okay, I'll go away. I'll go and race in Japan or race somewhere else, get myself sort of fit, come back and then sort of go, I'm back. Or it was to push myself to a degree that I'd never ever pushed myself before, mentally and physically, especially on that sort of rehab I did in Austria, where I had to sort of climb up mountains quite literally and then come back down again, walk back up again, come back down again. And it was damn painful. I can't really explain how painful it is. I think it's like someone sticking needles in the tips of your toes every step that you made going up the mountain. But I was willing to go through that because that dream was given to me by Peter and Benetton to be on the grid for Rio in 1989. So that drove me to do it. So as I said, there were those two options. If I'd gone away and then come back 2 years later, let's say, and said, I'm fit, I'm ready, things would have moved on. Other drivers, Jean Alessi, who again joined in 1989, he joined, to Formula One. Martin Donnelly came in. So all these new guys would have come in and then they would have gone, well, where have you been? Well, the last time I saw your legs are all smashed up. And they wouldn't have, I don't think they would have touched me with a barge pole, which I quite understand. So my saviour, weirdly, was doing that race in Rio. Okay, I could have just been in the race and going round and finished the race in last place, for example. But I finished fourth, and that still resonates today, which I find quite humbling in many respects, because it's lovely that people still remember that debut that I had in Rio, finishing fourth, only less than, I think, a second behind Alan Prost, who finished second, and Rico Guzman, who finished third.
Only just missed the podium, didn't you, really?
Yes, no, exactly. So the main thing was I got to Rio, and all that hard work, pain and sweat and everything else worked out for me. And if I hadn't done that race in Rio, and especially if I hadn't finished fourth, I think the rest of my career wouldn't have happened.
It's an incredible life lesson, I think, listening to you talk about that goalpost that Peter Collins gave you, that lifeline that Peter Collins gave you. Only then, and this makes me angry still, to be kind of punched in the face by your own team, really, that wanted it to go in a different direction, which is racing sometimes. But God, when you look back, you just think, bloody hell, Flavio.
That's the one. But then, to be honest, Suzi, I look back and I remember going to Imola and I struggled in qualifying. I got myself into the points, I remember. Then I spun actually in the race. And then we went to Monaco as another. I didn't qualify in Canada because that was all about braking, and I wasn't able to brake at all. When I was driving then, the monocoques were actually quite deep, and I couldn't brake with the ball of my foot. So the only way I could brake with a proper amount of pressure was to actually use my heel to brake. That's how big the monocoques were. But to brake with your heel and to feel, remember all that sensitive and the tips of your toes and everything.
Yeah.
Well, I'm braking with my heel.
Right.
Yeah, I had no feeling whatsoever. So I struggled in Monaco. So to a degree, I sort of understand why it happened. It's just I joined him again, obviously in '95 with Michael, and of course it was the same Flavio that I'd met in '89. But it hurt at the time. When I got the phone call, I didn't get the phone call from Flavio. I got it from his secretary, typically. But at the end of the day, I always believed I still had a chance. I went away to Japan, weirdly enough, to do that sort of rehab I was talking about. And then luckily Peter Collins, who got dropped by Benetton at the end of '88 for '89, he then took over Lotus, and then he got me back into Lotus. So if it wasn't for Peter, then again, I wouldn't have had a career either.
Mm. And driving alongside Michael Schumacher, how was that?
Michael, brilliant, lovely, very funny. He's got a good sense of humour. Very, very serious when he needed to be. He was very good at getting the team around him. Of course, he had his first World Championship in '94, and Rory Byrne, who designed the car, Ross Brawn, and the rest of the team around him just had this. And this is where I think Flavio was very good as well, to be honest, where he was able to believe in a driver and give that driver what he needed to do the job in the race car itself. Unfortunately, and it wasn't just me. I remember Jensen struggled when he was there with Flavio as well. Fisichella, truly, as there's a few others, that he could only focus on one. And if you're that second one, you're a little bit on your own, and that's a little bit more difficult to, I don't know, have that motivation when you're not really being helped by the people that initially had sort of promised so much, but then never delivered when it came down to it. So, but I'm glad I went through the experience. I'm glad I was able to win 2 Grand Prix, finish 4th in the World Championships. So that was nice as well. Was it perfect? No, but Michael was a good teammate to be with. You know, mighty quick, as we all know. Mm. And it's sad in the position that he's in at the moment after all that sort of risk he went through, and then a silly skiing incident does that harm to him. Hopefully there's something science that will be able to get the Michael back with a bit of luck. But at the end of the day, yeah, it was just part of that journey. There are decisions sometimes that I've heard certain drivers would never have made. They wouldn't have done that risk. They would have kept away from that strong driver partnership with Flavio and Benetton that he had, and they would have steered away from it. So, but I was in a position at that point, the end of Lotus, very sad times, and then this opportunity come up and I had to grab it. So I'm glad I did.
Yeah, so of your 3 wins, which one stands out for you? Because obviously they were all at great tracks actually, weren't they?
They were, yeah, all of them there. I was very lucky on that front. But Silverstone, you know, it's got to be Silverstone because of the home Grand Prix. All those fans that were there, as we said, those core fans that were there in those Formula 4 days and Formula 3 days. And, you know, that support is always there for the driver, that British driver who's at the front of the pack, middle of the pack, or the back of the pack. The support is always there for all of us. And I think that's brilliant. But for me, yes, that one is just a wonderful memory because of that. It's the first is always going to be special anyway. Yeah. But when it's at Silverstone as well, with the history that Silverstone's got, it's great that it's on the calendar again for this season. And you know, it's a very popular race, and the BRDC in Silverstone over the years, I have to say, have always tried to adapt the track to move it forward, to keep Formula 1 there. And I think they've always been able to achieve that. So, yeah, Silverstone's great. But you're right, Monza, lovely historic track as well. Nürburgring, equally so. So, yeah, I can't complain too much about it. You know, the only thing that's missing is the World Championship. Damn.
But we
My
all
next one.
know, we know that you would have won. We know. I
Would
know you
have.
would have won.
Would have.
I know, it's frustrating. It's great that Silverstone obviously is happening for Formula One. Sadly, it's not happening for MotoGP, which is not so great because of the whole quarantine scenario, I think, has played. And obviously most of the Formula One teams are based in the UK, so it kind of made sense. There's so many more questions. We haven't even talked about Le Mans. I'm going to...
that was an easy one, that one.
Go on, then.
Hey?
Summarize the Le Mans win for us.
I always said at the time I'd never ever do it again. but after my F1 career, I went back and did it with Audi and Bentley and stuff. So yeah, it was a tough one. Mazda, brilliant, because obviously it was not expected. Beautiful rotary Wankel sound that engine made. Still a very popular car even today. And I was very lucky with Bertrand Gachot, Volker Weidler, my teammates, who, you know, we got it across the line. I never made the podium, unfortunately, because I never really prepared myself in the proper way. We used to get up about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. There was always a bit of a warm up. Then the race would start at 4, and I never went to bed probably until about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. And that was just the most daft, stupid thing that you can ever do. You've got to save as much energy as you possibly can. And I didn't do that. And the second thing that probably wasn't my fault, but I learned from Nigel Mansell, weirdly enough, because I always got nervous. I always then had to take on as much food as I possibly could to give me that energy. I struggled to do that. So Nigel, what he did teach me, this is after that win in 91, was to have a fry up. A fry up did help line the stomach, and you felt full and you felt okay. At Le Mans, I survived on pot noodles. What goodness is in a pot noodle?
None.
Well, I am proof there is none, because I never got to the podium because I had no energy left after the race itself. But I did learn from that experience.
Thwarted by a pot noodle. It's not the first time I've heard that.
Well, and it wasn't even a curry choice back then.
I love that story. I've got a few. Well, I had loads of questions from people to ask you. I think we've covered quite a lot of them. PM O'Toole, what cars do you own? You got anything special you would like?
No, I've never been a sort of a car person. No, as far as on the road, because what's the point of getting something really sporty when you can't use it?
Well, that's fair enough.
The best car I've ever had, and I used to thrash it to death. I would slipstream lorries going down the M1. I'd probably top out about 75 miles an hour down a hill. I'd hang on for dear life around a roundabout. So I'm driving the thing. I'm probably around about 20 miles an hour. A short wheelbase Army Land Rover. It's the best road car I've ever had. I could thrash it, knowing I'd never get caught for speeding because it wouldn't go fast enough. But my, I was driving the hell out of the thing.
Love it. That's a great answer.
An old classic Mini, I think I've got in the garage. That's the only thing I've got.
Oh,
because
nice.
I'm small. Yeah, because I'm small.
Carl Whitehouse, any other motorsport that you would like to have competed in?
IndyCar, Indianapolis 500. That was always as a kid going in my karting days. Formula One, obviously. Le Mans was the other, so they're nice ticks.
Yeah.
And then Indy was the other one, and I did go there. I was there for pole day in 2003, something like that, 2002, 2003. But I never attempted in qualifying. So you always got to do the average. Yeah, the 3 laps, I think it was back in those days. And we tried, and it didn't matter if I went backwards. I had 3 wheels on it, 2 wheels on it, upside down. It just didn't have the speed that we needed. So sadly, I couldn't stay on for bump day because I was racing sports cars for the champion Audi team, and it was in San Francisco, I think it was, Samoa. And I had to race that weekend, so I had to leave the team there. So that was one thing I wanted to do, because I was never afraid of the ovals, because I thought it was the challenge was was something special. And the only way I can, because some people say, well, you're mad because, you know, it's just a wall the whole way around it. But the only corner, the old corner that used to really make you think was the old Blanchiment in Spa. And that's how I would classify Indianapolis, for example. It's a Blanchiment 4 times when the barrier used to be right against the side of the track. And that was a challenge. That goes back to the driving skill.
Yeah, it's such a spectacle to watch, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
when there's a crash, it's just,
yeah, it's an immense one. Yeah.
Talk about danger, but I mean, you obviously you love danger. You have loved danger because you went back after what happened to you and raced, presumably embracing and was the danger element of racing a part of what you loved?
Yeah, I think it was conquering that. I think it was pushing yourself to that limit, knowing that there was the dark side of if you was to go off the circuit. But that was the buzz. That was the excitement that you got. And I think that's what I think the majority of drivers, I hope they still get that same type of buzz. It's being on the edge. It's knowing if you go over that edge, there's going to be some repercussion because of that. And I think that was the excitement that pushed me all the time. So I always pushed myself. I didn't need anybody else to sort of, push me and motivate me in any shape or form. I'd motivate myself and push myself to the limit. And that's the buzz.
It's pretty special to be able to do that, Jonny. I think you probably have more people kind of wishing that you'd pull back a bit. I imagine. I know that your wonderful wife never did that or never said that and just supported you from the interviews that I've seen over the years. Scooby Rich would like to know, 20 laps, any circuit, any Formula One car, past or present, go.
Oh, well, I'd probably like to drive the 86, 87 Williams, because I think in the old Honda, in that turbo era, because I think those cars, I tested 2 of those, a Benetton Ford and a Lotus Honda, and they were very different to this modern day. Now it's like a go-kart, hustling it around at every inch of the circuit. The old turbo, there was a total different style. It wasn't about gunning it into the corner, turning in on the throttle, because you couldn't, because in those days, because you had all the turbo lag, then 1,000 or 1,500 horsepower sort of came in, you just spin off the track like a top. So you'd go into clearways at Brands Hatch. That's one of my first tests I ever did in an F1 car, and it's a long curve, clearways, and you'd go in second. This is on the short circuit. You go in second, you go to third, you go to fourth, you go to fifth. And the only time you were flat out was actually when you passed the pit lane entry. So a totally different style, but my, I'd love to have driven that era of car when they had 15 or so 100 horsepower, because I think that would be the ultimate.
Okay. And circuit wise, Silverstone or?
Circuit wise,
Bazooka?
I'd probably say the old Spa. The old Spa, the long Spa.
Okay, good answer. Thank you. Loads of people ask, I feel like I can answer this question for them. Racing or television, what's better, TV? I mean, racing is obviously better than working on television, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It is the ultimate. It is, yeah. It is the... It's me, and again, it goes back to that thing. It's just me pushing myself, pushing that envelope every single time you get into the car, and that is the total excitement that you get from driving. Yeah, and again, from the TV world, as you know, Suzi, very well, there is another buzz. It's a different type of buzz, but it's a different world. The only thing I miss is that friendship. When I was either driving or not driving, or not doing TV, you'd walk in the paddock and you could chat with everybody quite openly, quite freely. Now you're sort of in the media world. They don't talk to you anymore. They always think you're after something. So that's changed with every team and every friend I have in the paddock.
It's a fine line to dance, actually, isn't it, as a journalist in the paddock, because you're seeing people week in, week out. You need their trust, but you also need to deliver something on TV. Otherwise, it's boring, because everybody knows so much now, because everybody's an expert. So Yeah, it's that sort of fine line, isn't it? You do it very well. You've got a crack team, obviously, at Sky, a wonderful lineup of brilliant experience, world champions, personality. The girls are great, you know, Rachel and Nat. It is just must be a dream team to work in, Jonny.
Yeah, it is good. It is fun with everybody from Simon and, you know, and Karoon. You said Damon as well, Jensen when he joins as well. So yeah, so everybody, Ted and everybody is part of the team, and even the crew behind the camera. You know, they're a great bunch of girls and guys that work very, very hard. They're very creative in what they do, and that's probably makes it more special. I think Martin's always, you know, saying thanks to them, because if it wasn't for them, these creative shoots that we do wouldn't come to fruition, because the ideas wouldn't have been there in the first place. So that's where I think Sky and the F1 team have got a very good mentality and a good sort of mindset of what the people watching want to see.
And you do well, because nights out with Simon Lazenby, they can be pretty dangerous as well, can they not?
No, he's a good lad now. He's matured over the years, and now he's the true pro. True pro.
He's great, and you all do a really good job. It's a lot of time to fill as well, which I think people don't kind of embrace. They don't really understand sometimes, you know, how much content and how much work behind the scenes goes into filling those hours and hours and hours of content on what you've got your own channel, haven't you? Your own Formula One channel. So
yeah, we still got to be able to talk about it, especially when we have, you know, when we have a structured sort of build up, and then sort of you know, the chat of after what happened in the race. There are the occasion where the event has had a protest, or there's been an incident in some shape or form, and then instead of it being like, I don't know, an hour and a half sort of rundown at the end of the show, it ends up being, I remember we did one in Monza, I can't remember what year it was now, and it was like 4 hours that we did, and it was off the cuff, and we had to come up with things to try and drag out those 4 hours to get eventually the FIA stewards report, and it's all that filling in that goes on as well. So you can plan things, but of course, as you know, in racing, it doesn't matter if it's 2 wheels or four wheels, those plans don't always come to fruition, and they don't sort of end up like you think they would do, and that's where you've got to try and be reactive, let's say.
Yeah, I think you can only call yourself a broadcaster if you've had to fill for hours on end with nothing happening on track. We did a 5.5 hour show at Silverstone a couple of years ago when it rained continuously.
Oh right, yes, that one, yeah.
Not one bike on track.
No.
Then you earn your money.
You do.
And obviously there's no feeling like driving, like racing, like winning, like being on the podium. But what is it in your life, not comparing it to that, but what's filled that gap for you?
Well, the only thing that did, although it's gone now, but it's it did give me excitement. There was the knowing when my mum used to go and watch me karting. She could never watch me when I was driving. She was always getting too nervous about it. It was when my daughters did a bit of equestrian horse riding, and that gave me a bit of a buzz watching that, actually. And so the competitive instinct came out in me. I was always then trying to put that upon them as well. But the only thing that was frustrating with it is I was always very good with controlling my nerves, and bless my daughters, they were hopeless. hopeless. And of course, a horse is a very sensitive animal.
Yeah,
and
they feel everything.
They feel everything. So when you show a little sign of a nerve, it responds to that. So that was the only thing sometimes that frustrated me. And I always said to them, I said, stop thinking about the competition, enjoy it. And then when you enjoy it, the nerves sort of disappear. So, but I enjoyed doing that, and that's something that's nice memories. Don't do it anymore, unfortunately. So,
well, thank you for sharing your memories with us this morning. It's been an absolute treat and a joy to talk to you. It always is.
Thank you, Susie.
But thank you for saying yes as well, because I know that things are getting super busy and there's all these Zoom meetings for everything going on and whatnot. But I know that everybody was really excited that you were coming on the Breakfast Club this morning. So thanks, Jonny.
No problem.
Have a
Hope to see you soon with better luck.
Yeah, hopefully. And I hope the season goes, well now when it kicks off. And and the racing gets underway. And lots of love to you and your family, and have yourselves a great day.
Yeah, love to you, and of course everybody out there, be safe.
Thanks, Jonny. Ah.